G'day and welcome to my series on coupes and convertibles, and this week we've got a 2003 BMW Z4. Everything about the styling of this car screams sports car. The aggressive looking front end, the long swooping bonnet line, and of course rear wheel drive. Around the front it's got a nice BMW kidney grille and some really nice aggressive looking xenon headlights as well. And around the side, I really like this touch. It's got the BMW logo there. Kind of reminds me of like the airplanes they used to have back in the day, where they plastered the BMW logo on the side, and it even houses the indicator as well. So that's a really cool little touch. This particular example is riding on some nice BBS wheels that I think really suits the styling of the car nicely. Moving around to the back end, it has a really nice appearance. These sort of wide fender flares that come out over the rear wheels give it a really nice aggressive look. And of course, around the back it has some nice looking tail lights and some cool looking sort of twin exhausts down the back there that happen to sound very nice when they paired with the 2.5 litre 6-cylinder engine. Speaking of the engine, it's a BMW M54, 2.5 litre inline 6, makes 141 kilowatt and 245 newton meters. So it's certainly no powerhouse, but it does make very good torque, which means that it pulls very strong from any RPM. The interior is cramped to say the least, but that said, once you rustle yourself inside, it's actually surprisingly comfortable. I mean, these seats adjust electronically and hold you in very nicely, and they even have memory seat functions so that if you and your wife want to drive the car as well, you most certainly can. Also, I fit, believe it or not. Even with the roof up, I still have a good sort of 2 or 3 inches of headroom, which is more than enough for my liking. That said, when you start looking around the rest of the interior, there's an awful lot of grey and black plastics just sort of everywhere really. If I'm honest, it's not the greatest interior I've ever sat in. When you start pushing buttons, they all just have this kind of cheap plasticky feel to them. But that said, one real good positive thing about this car is that I love the look of the gauges. They have a very sort of classic vibe going on with them, and these dainty little stalks that show where the RPM and the speed is. It's a really nice looking little gauge cluster. So, driving the BMW Z4 automatic. So what's the deal with that? I know with all the cars I've had previously, I've tried to get manual ones because that's sort of the more desirable transmission, and after all, these are sports cars that I'm looking to review. In my mind, this automatic actually suits the car quite well, because the reality is it is a sports car, but it was always pitched as being more of a sort of comfortable tourer rather than a true backroad barnstormer like an S2000. But that said, even though it doesn't have pedals, which is my preference, it still has the Tiptronic mode, which actually works surprisingly well. The ride comfort, even though I said this was kind of pitched as a comfortable tourer, if I'm honest, the ride comfort is not especially brilliant. You can probably tell by the camera shaking around an awful lot that this is quite a firm ride. The next thing I'll talk about is the steering. I jumped in a 320i that we had traded in at work, and if I'm honest, I was really disappointed. It didn't have a lot of feeling, and it for some reason didn't seem to want to recenter, which really annoyed me through the corners. I was having to physically turn the wheel back to the center. But this steering, on the other hand, feels fantastic. I know exactly what the front end is doing, and it's very sharp and very direct to turn into corners. It feels absolutely brilliant. But it wouldn't be any use if this car didn't actually go around corners particularly well, but I'm happy to report that it most certainly does. The handling of this car is really rather excellent. Through these corners here, it just feels fantastic. The grip level is brilliant, and even though conditions are a little bit greasy today, at no point do I feel like the car is running out of grip at the front end. Through this hairpin bend here, the handling is excellent. The front end holds on very well, and the back end will happily step out if you give it a dab of throttle. In a lot of ways, this car feels an awful lot like a convertible BRZ. Connor in the passenger seat here loves his BRZs, and he's going to be disappointed with that comment, but it does feel quite a lot like it. Obviously it's got a 6-cylinder instead of a 4-cylinder, but it has that just fun factor all of the time that I absolutely loved about that BRZ. And of course the back end is happy to step out all the time and it just comes together to create a really enjoyable package, even with an automatic transmission. And this engine sounds brilliant when you get it up to the higher RPMs. And while it's not the most powerful in the world, it does still shift along perfectly well for my liking. Like what I said about that 86, it has just the right amount of power where you can enjoy it and feel like you can, you know, put your foot down out of corners and so on, but you're not going to be doing absolutely idiotic speeds in a very short space of time. And above all else, this car just puts a massive smile on your face all the time. I remember when we first got into this car to film the review with it, we were both just giggling at the sound and just, you know, we're like hardly moving, just driving slowly out the street, and yet we were smiling. Right, so thankfully the weather has cleared up enough for us to be able to drop the roof. And one thing I do really like about this is now you can really hear that lovely 6-cylinder engine. My only real complaint is that there's an awful lot of wind noise, and I suppose that's to be expected. But the S2000 with the roof down was actually surprisingly quiet to drive in. This is very windy. But I really love that sound. That 6-cylinder engine just sounds absolutely fantastic. And man, dropping the roof just gives this car so much just atmosphere and environment, you know. You can put your hands up here and feel the wind. Oh man, what an awesome car. Well, there we go. Thank you very much for watching this episode of KiwiCarLife. I have certainly enjoyed my time in this Z4. When I found out it was automatic, I was a little bit disappointed and thought it wasn't going to be as good as I expected, because obviously I'd always prefer a manual, but I've actually been quite impressed. Even with an automatic, this car is still an awful lot of fun to drive. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next time.